So I wanted to talk about the use of leaf, as in metal leaf, within ceramics. A lot of you guys know that I tend to do a lot of sculpture, and I tend to be somebody that doesn't limit myself to materials. But one of the things I always struggled with was figuring out how to really combine clay and metals together. The various properties of the materials, how they shrink and how they deal with expansion and contraction was always very tricky. So one of the things that I did over the years was learn how to do some metal leaf work. In other words, using things like gold leaf, silver leaf, copper leaves, and actually gilding on top of the clay if I wanted it to have some actual real metal put onto it. What I have today is a little piece, and unfortunately I broke it. It's not all that uncommon for me to do, but fortunately this was a pretty clean break. So I feel like I should be able to get this together pretty well, but I am going to be left with that little bit of a seam. So there's a long tradition, long Japanese tradition, mainly called kintsugi, which essentially means gold. You know what, I shouldn't even be trying to translate it, but it's a gold repair. So what we're going to do is use a little bit of epoxy. What I have here is some plumber's epoxy from JB Weld. You can get this at any of your local hardware stores. I like to use the plumber's epoxy a lot because it is able to handle water. And I just never know where these pieces are going to go. They may go outdoors for a while, so it's nice if it doesn't get obliterated by water. It's a two-part epoxy, so what I'm going to do is just take a very small amount. And this epoxy essentially has an inner core and an outer wrapping. You want to grab even amounts of both of them. Sometimes if I have a little skin that's built up on one side, I will just take that bit and discard it. So I'm just going to grab the slightest little bit of this epoxy. I'm going to wrap up anything that remains, and this epoxy will not start to set until we start to meld these two materials together. So I do have plenty of working time to put this down, and what I'm going to do is just knead this material together with my fingers. It will get on my hands. If you prefer, you can definitely use gloves. And I'm going to knead this for 3 or 4 minutes. So as I'm kneading it, we'll just talk about the process, where my head is at, and kind of what I hope the outcome is going to be. So as I work this material together, it's going to get very, very sticky and tacky, and then it will start to form up. I don't like trying to work this material or apply it to forms as it is this tacky, because I find it's tough for me to be very clean. But what I will do is just keep kneading it together until it feels like sticky clay. You know, just to the point where it's not set up enough where you're not going to get any transference, but where you can essentially push it around, move it around, and you're not going to start getting that white stuff all over your piece. So like I said, we'll give it a couple minutes there. And then what I'm going to do is roll up the smallest coil I've ever made. And I'm just going to tack that coil right onto where that crack is. It is worth noting with this crack that it's not dusty. If you have kind of a layer of dust that's built up, like you broke this piece a year ago and you were putting off repairing it, you might just want to take a sponge with some water and remove any of that dust. Those thin layers of dust can often get in the way of glues. I'm just going to grab however much material I think that I need. I'll put the rest to the side. And I'm just going to roll that epoxy in between my fingers. I'm going to get, like I said, the smallest amount. So I will just keep pulling off what I know I don't need. All right, and I can feel that this is almost perfect. So we'll just keep on thinning this out. And then once I'm at the point where I'm ready to apply it, I'm just going to dab it onto the piece so it sticks a little. I don't mind if there's a little bit of excess, but I don't want a lot. I'll pull away any material that I don't need. Okay, so this looks like overkill. It looks like we just put a big bead of silicone on a very small crack. I tend to try to wash my hands in between putting those pieces together, just so I don't have any of that sticky property, or that don't have the tackiness interfere with me trying to be delicate. Okay, and that's good enough for me as far as hands being clean. It's a video, so you can't tell anyway. And then just going to line this piece up and push it together. Once I have it pushed in place, I'm just going to hold onto it for a few and just make sure that that it doesn't move on me. Right, and this does such a good job of holding place. If it starts to slump down just a little bit, I'll just raise that up. And I only need to give this a couple of minutes. So on small little pieces like this, I oftentimes just give it a minute or two to air dry. And then I'm going to go back and just tap down or scrape off any of that excess material on both the interior and the exterior. I don't want to do it too soon. I want this to barely start setting up before I apply any pressure. And sometimes a good trick is that if you had mixed up a little bit more and you had put it on the side, given this is always really tacky, so make sure that you put it on a surface that is disposable. But what you can do is just keep going back to that form and feeling if it's still tacky and at what point you feel confident that you can remove a little bit of the material. So I'm just going to peel away whatever I can. And sometimes I'll actually grab like just a little piece of bamboo, just a little bit of wood. And I will just try to kind of scrape off or knock off what I don't need. This epoxy sets in about 5 minutes. So I do like to work pretty quickly on it. If you're uncomfortable with those work times, there's different epoxies out there that may be more suited to how you like to work. So now that I kind of got some of that excess material off, I'm just going to work the rest of it into that seam. Again, I'm just being very delicate. I'm just giving a little bit of pressure. All right, and the same on the interior. I'm just going to knock off any of that excess material. Looking pretty good. And it is still just ever so slightly tacky. So while this is still tacky, what I'm going to do is take some leaf. Oftentimes I like to grab the leaf with tweezers. This is just such a small piece that I'm not going to worry about that. No, I love using copper leaf. That's one of my favorites. I just think it's a really beautiful material and it isn't seen all that much. So I'm just going to take whatever I can from that leaf, literally press it onto that seam and just keep pressing it onto wherever wherever that epoxy or that glue is. Now these leaves are so incredibly fine that it's going to stick strictly where that glue is. The rest of it, once this epoxy starts to dry and set up, will just be able to be brushed off. Again, I just want to get that interior as well. So the thing with leaves is you tend to just do a lot of overkill. You know, you apply a lot more leaf than you actually need, and then just try to brush away or wipe away the rest. So again, I'm just grabbing a couple more little slivers. Again, a lot of the times I do like to use tweezers to do this. And if you really get into gilding, which that's what this process is called, there's some other materials that you can use to do that. Now, if your epoxy sets up too quickly on you, so we were able to, for the most part, it looks like we were able to get this tacked down without a problem. But if the epoxy did set too quick, then you can just go back on top of it with just a little bit more epoxy or glue. For me, I like to use shellac or lacquer. But traditionally speaking, you can also get a material called sizing, and that's what we call glue in the gilding world. And you can get that sizing at just your craft store or Michael's or online somewhere. You brush it on and follow the instructions. It essentially sets up, and once it gets a little bit tacky, you would just apply that leaf so that way it sticks. I'm going to give this just a couple of minutes now and make sure that I have the leaf covering every bit of the seam that I'm able to. And then I'm just going to grab the softest brush that I can find or that I own. If you're somebody that has somebody in your family with a makeup brush and they're not using it anymore, that's a great solution. Those brushes are just incredibly soft. But otherwise, just kind of raid your house and whatever you can find for a soft bristle brush will work great. So I'm just going to give this a minute to set up, and then we'll hop back and brush this away and see what it looks like. Okay, so we are at that point where I'm just going to grab a very soft bamboo brush. Not too much time has gone by, maybe a couple of minutes. A lot of the times I don't mind just doing this in real time. I just always make sure that the glue is no longer tacky to the point where it will get on the brush. It also helps if you have a clean brush, but in a studio like mine, that's probably a rarity. What I'm going to do for that brush work is just dab it down. You don't want to be aggressive. You don't want to start pushing things away. And if there's any of that leaf that hasn't stuck and there's still exposed glue left, well, this is a dusty brush, then what we want to do, then what we want to do is just work any of that material into that seam. And like I said, if there's a spot that we have to go back to later, that is quite all right. And I don't mind applying just a little bit more glue or size and really bringing it down to perfection. Looking nice though. Pretty nice. Again, we'll get that interior for us. Okay folks, so there you have it. I wound up brushing a little bit of a thicker line of glue or sizing on just to make it pop a little bit more. I just felt like that crack was nice, but I really liked having that larger line, especially because I feel like this piece does have a front, so it's nice to have that real pop of copper. So the last things that I want to mention on it is one, that you are not restricted to strictly having to repair cracks. You can just brush on sizing or that type of glue or even lacquer and use that as a way to literally put it right on top of rock clay or right on top of raw glaze. And the other thing I do want to mention is that metals can oxidize. So if you're concerned about your metals oxidizing, like I use copper, that copper will lose its brightness over the next couple of years. For me, I absolutely love that. I love that it really becomes part of the piece. It gets that real natural patina. But if you are using a metal that will oxidize, and you don't want it to, then there are sealants available. If you actually use gold, gold will never oxidize. You will always have gold stay as gold. But the last thing I will say is that these are a very, very thin surface. So even though our crack repair was nice and solid and we had a good bead of epoxy there, the actual size of the leaf is so delicate. I believe you can fit about something like 10,000 sheets into the thickness of a dime. It's something absurd like that. So that's another thing. If you are concerned about it scratching over time, this is a sculpture and I really don't think people are going to be going around and scratching it. But if you are concerned with that at all, then again, just a little bit of a sealant, and you can buy sealants from any art supply store online, or you know, for me, I just tend to buy lacquer. That's my kind of old traditional go-to. So I just hit up my local hardware store and get lacquer or shellac, same thing. Hope you guys give it a shot, and I hope you guys have a blast. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys soon.